Okay, guys, for our next card, you have a piece of Blackberry Bliss. I've embossed it with my tin tile. And then I'm also going to take that same size, which is 4 by 5 1/4, and emboss this with my tin tile as well. So this is the galvanized tin sheet from your packet that you need to cut to 4 by 5 1/4, and both of these pieces are embossed, okay? We're going to use one on each card for the next round. Now, here are the other pieces. We've got our Blackberry Bliss card bases. So we'll use those last two pieces that were on the top of our packet for the inside of these cards, because again, this cardstock is just so dark. So I'm going to fold both of them in half. Now we're going to do our stamping. And this one is really, I think, kind of a fun thing. And what I always am striving to do in these classes is give you kind of alternative uses. I mean, some of the obvious uses are obvious, so you don't really need to have help with them. But in this case, I really just wanted to share with you some alternative ideas to give you, you know, more ways to use your stamp set. Okay, so I'm just grabbing a couple of markers. Now on this one, I'm going to be using Stampin' Blends. If you don't have Stampin' Blends, you can use whatever method of coloring you prefer. That's completely, you know, optional, up to you, whatever. But if you do use a different form of or method of coloring, then I would use different ink to stamp it with. So because I'm using Stampin' Blends, I'll stamp it in my black Memento ink. If you are going to watercolor or use watercolor pencils or whatnot, I would use StazOn black to stamp your images. Okay, now in this case, we're going to use the large spray that's got the cattails and the artichoke in it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it upside down and stamp it once, kind of at the bottom here, just maybe like the bottom inch or so. And then I'm going to flip it around and stamp it right above that same spot, okay? And then we will cover up kind of the ugly. You'll see what I mean in just a second here. So I'm going to stamp about an inch down here. And then I'm going to flip it around and stamp right above like that. I probably could have even left a little bit of a gap. But what we'll do is we'll put this piece over the top so you won't see that weirdness right there. Okay? So for this, I'm going to, like I said, I'm going to use my Stampin' Blends, and I'm going to start with my crumb cake, and I will go ahead and add a little of the, I always like to start with the dark. So I'm just going to color on those cattails a little bit of dark right there. And there's just a peek of them down there, and I think that's everything. Then I'll go over it with my light crumb cake, kind of blending as I go. So we get that beautiful color. I will tell you, I love using blends because they're just so easy to work with. Really adds a nice touch and whatnot. Now I'm gonna next use my dark mint macaron and do these little leafy things. So I'm gonna kind of just, because these leaves are so tiny, it's hard to do a lot of shading on them. I'm just gonna sort of go like every other leaf, I guess, and then I'll fill the other ones in with the light mint. And if you're not perfect on this every other, in fact, I just colored in between leaves. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal. There's plenty going on here. Nobody's going to notice. Okay. We've got more down here. Just making sure I'm in the camera. Sometimes I get coloring and I'm not paying attention to what's happening on the screen. So I just want to make sure you can all see what I'm doing. There we go. Then, like I said, I'll come back and do the light in between. And this can definitely be a quick thing. but I think it's pretty. And I'm pulling the colors right out of the DSP, so I'm not doing a lot of thinking about this. They're just colors right out of the DSP. Now I have, this is the light daffodil. And by the way, all the colors and everything are in your directions. I'm going to do these little dotty things. I don't know what they are. I'm not very good with botanical stuff. It's not really my comfort zone. Okay, now I'm going to do the artichoke. And I love the artichoke because it's kind of the centerpiece of this little bouquet thing. So I'm adding a little bit of dark old olive to the base of each artichoke leaf, I guess. Okay. And then there's the second one down here. Then we're going to come in and add the light old olive with this. Oh, and you know what? I'm going to add, there's a leaf right here. I'm going to color in, and this same one too, I'm going to do with old olive. Okay, I'm going to come back with my light old olive and blend each of those little tip petals. I'm leaving the tip blank because we're going to put some purple on there, because if I'm not mistaken, artichokes have like a purpley tip. I do know a few things. Okay, I actually have to come clean on that. I was coloring this during a Facebook Live, and one of my customers told me to do that. So I did come across as all smart right there, but really it was one of my customers that helped me with that. Somebody who was watching anyway. Okay. And then we did that individual leaf, so make sure to blend that out. That looks good. Now I've got my Blackberry Bliss ones, and I think these are kind of pinky, so I'm actually going to pull out my Highland Heather for this, just because, I don't know, I think that's more of the correct color. So I'm just putting a little purple on the tips of each of these, and I may even kind of come back and blend it a little bit with a color lifter. Just, I don't know, it looks all right. Okay, so there we go. Now all of this business we're gonna do with our Rich Razzleberry. Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of go along each, or I'm sorry, this is not Rich Razzleberry, this is Blackberry Bliss. Rich Razzleberry would work just fine for this, by the way, if you don't have a Blackberry Bliss. So I'm just going to kind of color each of the centers of these leafy things. I don't even know what these are. I really lost you all. I sounded all smart on my artichoke, but then I lost you when I said I don't know what these are. I mean, they're leaves, and I think this is one of those things where you can kind of do whatever you want with them. I wanted the coloring to be like this, so that's why I'm going with this color scheme. Because I wanted to see those colors in what I was stamping. But again, here's where you can really take some liberties coloring. But there is greenery that's going to come out in this color. And here's where I get a little confused. I'm like, okay, which parts do I color in? Which parts do I leave? And I think, again, because of the way this is, it doesn't make that big a difference if you color in extra or omit a few things. No one will know. And actually, it almost might help to flip this over just so you can see the other side, because your eye kind of gets confused when this in-between space is kind of like, what is happening there? Okay. So I'm just trying to blend these out a little bit. And again, I'm not perfect. It's all right. Nobody knows. But the part I want to do is just get some pretty colors in here. And then they're going to kind of go nicely with my card. All right. So there we go. I think that looks pretty good. All right. So again, this piece is going to fit right over the top. So keep that in mind as you're coloring. All right. That, I think, changes things a little bit for me anyway. So let me get rid of these markers, get them out of the way. We'll come back to them because I do really like the blends for this stamp set. Again, if you don't have blends, just substitute with what you have, whether it's an aqua painter in your ink pads, your watercolor pencils and blender pens, whatever you like to stamp with. Okay, so I've adhered this to the crumb cake layer, and then this strip of mint macaron is going to go over the top. I want to stamp that same sentiment we actually had in the last card, the Happy Harvest Blessings. And we don't have a ton of space on here. So I'm going to stamp it kind of in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is actually wrap it around my card. And I really want to make sure I wrap it tight. So here's what I actually am going to do. And you guys might find this a little odd, but it works for me. So I've centered it across my bouquet, and I want a little bit more of this artichoke to show, so I'm kind of scooching it down just a hair. Okay, then I want to wrap that nice and tight. Okay, and sometimes you get a little crinkle you might not like. So here's what you can do. Take a scissors, because it's got a nice fine point on it, and I just kind of scored my cardstock, and then that will help it wrap really well. You can bend it yourself, but sometimes you get a weird kink. So that's just what I'm showing you. Now when I wanted to show you the kink, but of course it didn't happen. But anyway, so that's what I did, and then I'll just adhere those to the back side. You can use glue dots if you want. Okay, so there's that. We're going to set that aside. Now, our card is going to be the same, whether you're using this one or this one. But on each of these, we're going to do a little distressing, okay? So I want to grab a sponge dauber for the distressing part. That sounds terrible. Like, it's so distressing. Let's see, here we go. I think this one will work. All right. And I'm going to take my Blackberry Bliss ink and a sponge dauber, ink it up, and then I'm just going to kind of carefully brush this on the background. And what I'm doing is just sort of coloring that background up a little bit, staining it really. Okay, and I think this is a really cool way to bring out some of the color. Remember, you're going to cover a lot of this, so it's okay if you don't have it all, like so. Okay, and then when I put this on here, it really, I think, is kind of pretty. And then when you put it on here, it's really cool. So that gives it definitely a look of kind of distressed and vintagey whatnot. Now the other thing I'm going to do to this, and it's a little counterintuitive, only because you already have the galvanized paper is already, you know, shimmery, but we're going to actually spritz it with some shimmer. Okay, so here's the shimmer spritzer we made. I'm holding it about 12 inches up, and I'm adding some shimmer to this. Now you don't see a lot of it, but what it does is it kind of adds in some gold flecks to the silver, and I think that's really pretty. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing here, but this time we're going to use the shimmer paint. Okay, so I'll shake up my shimmer paint, and I'll use my sponge. I'll dab this, and here you don't want a ton, okay? So I'm just going to carefully kind of rub this on, like so, as much or as little as you want. And you I like kind of doing the streaks like that. You know, it picks up in the design and it's really pretty, but I don't want it to be everywhere. I just want it in partial. And that, the partial kind of gives it that vintagey look. So we'll go ahead and attach this to our card base. I meant to attach the other one too. Okay, so this kind of gives us different looks, which I think are fun. Okay. And then on either one of these, we'll just take and pop up your sentiment and your sentiment. Isn't that cool? So you've got very different looks depending on what you do. Now, if you want, you can also take your sponge and dab a little bit of shimmer on the parts that you've colored. And that too is really pretty. Okay. Just a little shimmer. And then, like I said, we'll pop this up. So that's all there is to that card. It's really pretty. Kind of a different way to use both your embossing folder. Well, not really your embossing folder. I mean, obviously we're embossing. That's pretty standard. But picking up, you know, those different areas on there, as well as adding the shimmer or the stamping, or I'm sorry, ink onto the background. Just, it kind of changes up the look. All right. And once again, I forgot something. Okay, so the other thing that I wanted to add to this was some of our braided linen trim. So what I'm doing is passing this under. I have been doing this so much lately. I really need to look at my sample once more before I kind of commit. So I'm just going to tie a knot of this on here. Like so. I can't believe I forgot to do this. And you know what? Speaking of forgetting, I also forgot to put the inside piece in as well. So the inside my card panel. And again, I'm just kind of fraying the ends here a little bit. And oh, I just think that's so pretty. That really finishes it off. And then, of course, our last two pieces of Whisper White can go in here. And just like that last card we did, if you want to stamp on the inside, you can do that as well. There we go.